I think something has to, in many cases, has to push you to need to change. It shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it appears to me.
Darren, how did you find carnivore?
Oh, I think for me it's been a long journey, I think, throughout most of my life to get to this point. Um, a lot of frustration with my diet over the years. So I'm type 1 diabetic. I was diagnosed when I was 15, which is about 33 years ago now, almost 48. And yeah, back when I was diagnosed, I mean, I was just a general young teenager, eating all the things teenagers do, junk food and the wrong kind of diets, candy and all this sort of stuff. And so it was quite a transformation to have to change from that lifestyle once I was diagnosed with it. And then, of course, got introduced to, probably was my first nutritionist I've ever talked to, a dietitians. And up to that point, I'd probably never talked to a dietitian before in my life. Um, and so they started me getting into all the things I shouldn't be eating and all the things I should be eating according to their food pyramids. And this is the early 90s, so they don't think they've really changed much to this day, really. Most of that advice still stands in terms of traditional medicine. I think it was like eating like 60 grams of carbs per meal, and this is, for what we consider now for a diabetic, just completely inappropriate. What you consider, but avoid as much protein as you can. I think it got told it would affect the kidneys. It was like just kind of always kind of scaring me away from doing certain things, guiding me towards whatever advice they wanted to feed me, really. Um, and yeah, so that was, I had to kind of adjust to that kind of lifestyle of eating a completely different way, and that wasn't easy for being a teenager. And I think when I got to around the age of about 20, um, I was having a lot of struggles with with the diets, eating food, and I was an outpatient at the hospital, and I asked them advice on what I can do because I'm always eating at different times of night. My blood sugars are fluctuating all over the place, and they, rather than adjust the kind of food or adjust my diet, they said no, we'll just adjust your medication. So um, they put me on a completely different regime of insulin because completely insulin dependent, and I tried that out. And the very first, what they didn't really do was give me a proper management plan for it. Um, so this next morning, I tried out what they told me to do. I thought I was following the advice, doing all the right things, and I was on the train, and I think I pretty much almost had went unconscious because the sweeping sensation, my blood sugar just plummeted. Um, and then eventually I got through that, and then that night I went out and blood sugars did the complete opposite. They went sky high until I don't know what the conversion systems are different, but for here we deal in the lower value, so it's like it was over 25, which is considerably high. And I ended up in hospital that night as well. Um, but what came out of that in the end is I started experiencing a lot of anxiety, and that things fluctuate because of the insulin. I just wasn't coping with it, and I was pleading with my doctor. I'm just not coping with this, and he told me, no, just stick with it, stick with it. You've got to. We need you to do this kind of thing, and we need you to be taking this. I think I was originally taking it two times a day, and they were trying to get me to take it 4 times a day to kind of like fluctuate with meals, kind of a different approach completely. And they just, I just couldn't adjust to that. And then a bit later, I like I said, I started getting panic attacks. Basically, I didn't really realize it at the time, but it was the one episode. One day, I just went into full scale meltdown. I couldn't trust what my blood glucose readings were. My body I just couldn't accept it. So I ended up at the hospital um, again. And when I came out of there, I just felt completely different. It was almost like walking into the light. It was quite a strange sensation, and everything seemed different. And then after that, I couldn't function for probably weeks. I couldn't go on public transport. I couldn't do anything. I would just completely freak out. It was just such a profound effect. It's just messing with medication. It's something that kind of has been with me most of my life, to be quite frank. Um, rather than focus on the things that are important, like your diet, it's just focusing on medication. Um, yeah, it's just been a hard journey to get to here. But I think what actually led me to Carnivore was what led me to getting started with, I should say, is I mean I've always been a heavy YouTube user, um, and like I said, I've always been searching for something to change my life, and I think things just popped up one day. Videos about eating meat for 10 years, and it just kind of led from there, really, the curiosity. I mean, probably not at first. I would have just passed that off just like most everyday people. Seeing that kind of thing, they're just like, oh, it's kind of rubbish. But it wasn't until I kind of came across um, a video of someone who was actually talking with Dr. Shafee, I believe it was a type 1 diabetic. And so I was kind of really curious about that. And I yeah, watched that, and I thought to myself, huh, okay, this is something maybe this is something that's worth pursuing. But at the same time, I was still very, very nervous because of the impacts of trying to change things I'd had throughout my life. And that's kind of what I guess is probably what put me off for a long time. And I didn't really pursue any kind of research into the subject because I'd got into a bad, got into a really bad diet for what you'd consider a diabetic. I was eating all the wrong things over the last 10 years, like junk food and sugar and chocolates and things that diabetics are just not meant to eat. And it just progressively got worse. But as that got worse, so did I ended up taking more and more insulin. So that really kind of pushed me to the edge almost. My insulin levels just kept going up and up and up and up. And so like that became harder to control and harder with the fluctuations. So that was more frustration, and that's kind of why in the end I thought to myself, I've got really nothing to lose with this. I've got to start somewhere, and this is something that people say they can help them control their diabetes and blood glucose levels and the fluctuation, because that was driving me insane.
Was it having any other health impacts, or was it just like kind of psychological, or were you kind of
Oh
experiencing
well, yeah. I mean,
neuropathy or
it
anything
did.
like that?
It did. I mean, one of the things that a lot of people diabetics face is something called the dawn effect, where their blood sugar just skyrockets in the morning for no apparent reason. Although I've seen a lot of theories on it, that was, and also the fear of. I mean, again, it's a bit psychological. The fear of what to what levels to go into the evening with or overnight, and the fear of have something happening overnight. That was always a psychological fear too. But I mean, I know that when my blood sugars are too high, I do feel a bit sick. You can kind of feel it in your stomach. There's something wrong there. So that was always something I was like, uh, it just I know when my blood sugars are too high. It's just like it's just a general sickness, and that's something I wanted to correct as well, because I'd rather stay a little bit lower or a little bit more normal, and just feel more normal. Even despite the advice my doctors have given me over the years, just seems to it just yeah crazy advice. But yeah, in terms of the journey from actual when I started, um, it was I think I originally was taking about six. I think I was ended up around 65 units of insulin a day. So that was quite, for me, that was getting a bit much because my syringe only catered for 50 units. It's like 40 odd units in the morning and 20 something in the evening. That was both long acting and short acting, most long acting. But even my short acting over the day was like 26 units, which was too much. And that's what causes the fluctuations, is having to put so much into you to try and reduce it. cause makes it quite unstable. But once I started on the journey, which was about October last year, um, I I knew I was nervous, really nervous, because I knew I was going to have an impact on my blood sugar levels. But I just had to try it anyway. So I just cut down very slowly, cut down the amount of carbs I had in my diet, and just left certain amounts that would certain things that would I knew would increase my sugar levels, like like processed like bread and kind of things like that. But I had to kind of gradually reduce it because as soon as I started doing it, my blood sugar level just kept plummeting lower and lower and lower and staying low. Um, and then, of course, the counter to that is you have to consume something to bring it up, which is not really what I want to do, which is more like sugar or glucose. And that's what kind of I try and avoid as much as I can, especially now. It's still a bit of a struggle, but that was a real experience to try and reduce the amount of insulin I'm having, but still keep I should say the reduce the amount of carbs I was having, but keep my insulin levels and my blood glucose levels um, stable. And over time, I gradually played around more my insulin levels. And towards, I think it took like 3 or 4 months to get to a point where I was at more of a stable level. I wasn't having to consume too much sugar or glucose to keep bolstering myself up. And by the time I was taking about 65 units a day, and I got that down to about 34 units. So I almost halved the amount of insulin I was taking. Yeah. Which, yeah, I was happy with because then I didn't have to worry about forgetting my insulin and worrying about overdosing because that was something I'd been plagued with for a long time. So what happens if I forget I'd taken it? Do I take another 40 units? So that freaked me out, you know. Um,
And so that 34 units, that's the total. Like
yeah.
how much was short acting from that
Oh,
34?
so yeah, the total short acting originally was about 26, went down to about 6. Yeah, it was dramatic. And to be honest, now I've probably brought that down to more like, um, well, total down to about 29. I take about 4 units of short acting now. So I'm not quite a third of what I used to be, but I'm working towards that. And there's only certain limitations I think my body can by handle. But recently, my doctor actually told me to reduce my long acting, which kind of surprised me. But I did. I cut it from down like 10 to 6, and it hasn't really impacted it much. That was more for overnight. But yeah, so that was probably took about 4 months of the first lot, and then over that, it's just really been playing and tweaking it to try and adjust it to how much I eat. And it's always an ongoing game with diet, really. Even now, I mean, it's going to be. And I've only been on this journey for just over 1 year, and I've seen people talk about diet type 1 diabetics. The journey is like 6 7 years. It's an ongoing journey, and yeah.
Wow. So when your doctor is giving you a recommendation like cut down on your long acting, like is your doctor aware of how you're eating, and what does your doctor think about that?
Good question. I only went to I I'm someone who's kind of tries to avoid doctors. I'm not someone who likes to go to the doctor if I can help it. And he's made that comment over the years, especially through the pandemic, because there might have been a couple of years in between one visit. And I'm someone who technically is eligible for like free visits every year. I haven't always been taking those up, but I generally get some sort of blood tests every year, but for my diabetes and general checkups. Um, I remember before I started this because I looked at the records as well. My it feels like my HbA1c, my blood glucose, has always been pretty normal for a long time, so I've never really had really high values in that. Um, almost on par with what they consider not even a concern for what a diabetic what they'd look for in a diabetic. That's what it says on the forms anyway. Um, but yeah, I remember last year my LDL was about, I think it was about 85. Oh, so, yeah, about 85. Um, and ACO was around the same thing. So I knew when I went to a doctor's appointment 3 months ago, I wonder what my blood test is going to say. It's like, I wonder what my doctor's going to say. And I expected that. I expected it to change. Although something I watched you recently saying it can change back too. So it's a fluctuating thing. It's not always a certain it's going to be high or low. It's just what your body needs it to be, and that's what I understand now. So when I had the test 3 months ago, I got the result. Well, I didn't get the lipids result straight away. I think that kind of flagged an alarm with them because they wanted to see me over it. Turned out my LDL was 499, so it had gone up from 85 to 499. Yeah, and my HDL gone up from 85 to 90. My triglycerides was a little high, but I think that's because I it wasn't a fasting test, and that's what I'm going to mistake. That's the next one. I'm going to make sure it's fasting because they don't require fasting, but it does impact things like triglycerides because of fat going through the system. So I want to see a proper test next time, but I have no idea what my next test is going to look like. But I did try and buy time with my doctor, because that was the last point he raised was like, okay, now we're going to talk about your LDL, and he, yeah, he started talking about statins, and in my mind, it's like, well, even if you push them, I'm not taking them, but I didn't tell him that. But I kind of bought more time. I just said, "Oh, how about I just do another test in about 3 months' time?" And he goes, "Oh, that's enough to bring it down," knowing that I wasn't going to change my diet. And I thought, well, I can have that conversation next time around if he's really going to push that, because he also left with the parting words of, "Oh, you can eat things like avocados and all these kind of healthy foods. Avoid animal meat." So I kind of knew there and then, well, I'm not going to win any conversations with him on this. So at least I can buy myself a few more times, see what happens to my cholesterol levels, and then maybe I don't have to worry about it having that hard conversation.
Yeah. I think the reality is, people that are consuming animal products, I mean, their LDL is naturally going to be higher, but assuming Nick Norwitz and Dave Feldman are on the right track with a lipid energy model,
Yeah, I've
um,
watched that recently. Yeah,
the f- the fact that you're consuming the animal products just means that you're eating less. Therefore, your body's got to transport more fat, triglycerides around your body,
yeah.
and that's why your LDL's higher, rather than being directly caused by the animal products. So it's
Well,
kind
that's
of
right. Yeah.
this catch 22 where it's like, well, it's but the doctors are never going to understand that, right?
Well, no, most doctors don't. The smart ones do.
Mm,
The ones that actually put in
yeah.
the time to actually do the research. But you're right. I mean, I've been watching a lot of Nick's videos around the energy model, the N equals one kind of philosophy. Um, really good videos, and that's also. I mean, a lot of that's reassured me too, because one of the things I was nervous about to start with was there was a lot of fear mongering about the difference between ketones and ketoacidosis, especially with diabetics. There's a lot of fear out there about, oh, you can't build up your ketones, you'll get into problems. But that's only if you're metabolically unhealthy to start with, if your blood sugars levels aren't controlled. But it took me a while to reassure myself that that was going to be the case. And I was prescribed blood ketone sticks, but I still don't think they really do. They're not the be all and end all, but they do provide me some reassurance. But um, I've never felt bad, you know. I never felt sick, and that's more of an indicator of whether what I'm doing, whether what I'm doing is right. So I'm not afraid of having certain keto levels anymore because I know that my blood sugar levels are good, and yeah, I'm only going to run that kind of risk if my blood sugars are really high, really high.
I think you've hit on a key point there, not just for type 1 diabetics, but for everyone. Is like when they say most people that do X get this problem, it's like, yeah, but most people that do X are metabolically unhealthy. So that's why
Mm,
they're getting that problem. It's got nothing to do with actually doing X, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, most people are, like I say, the majority of society these days is metabolically unhealthy, and most people don't want to accept it. Um, they're happy to go with the mainstream consensus on what they should eat, and most people aren't willing to challenge what they want to eat. Um, it's a hard it is really a hard thing to push yourself into doing, and a lot of people don't end up in that way till they actually are forced to change. It's not a Most people aren't willing to change through just stumbling across it. I think something has to, in many cases, has to push you to need to change. It shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it appears to me.
Yeah, I think that's kind of human nature, right? So it's like changing of your own accord is very uncomfortable.
Mm.
So it's only until something else becomes more uncomfortable that you're going to go and, oh, maybe I should change. Maybe I
Yeah,
should
that's
change my
right.
point of
Yeah,
view.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Mm.
Um, yeah. So how are you eat? Like, what is a normal day like as far as what you eat and how you kind of go through and manage with the long acting and short acting?
So I probably don't eat enough as it is. That's just trying to budget, I guess. But I mean, for me, most days, if I can, most days start out with one of my favorites, which is bacon and eggs. And I don't consume 600 eggs a month, but I do. I have been known to eat 12 to 15 a day. Um, so I do eat a lot of eggs and bacon when I've got it. That would generally be my staple breakfast and lunch. When I go into the office at work, I take, you know, some cooked stuff with me. And for dinner, it's mostly for dinners. It's um, either steak or pure beef patties. And there's a lot of junk ones out there, but luckily we do in New Zealand have some which are either 99% or 97% pure beef and maybe a few percent collagen and things like that. Um, and occasionally I'll have those kind of beef patties for breakfast or lunch as well. And is I try and mix it up with variety. I mean, last week I've been eating almost all steak every night, but I do love pork, lamb, but lamb's horrendously expensive, even more so than beef in this country. Yeah, I know for a
I,
country that
I'm
exports lamb and
surprised.
beef, yeah, it can be really expensive. The only lamb you get cheap is the ones with chops with big bones, and there's not much lamb in there. So it's not a lot
Yeah,
of meat to
there's
consume
about that
anyway.
much meat on it, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So I mean that's it, yeah, that's a typical meal for me, and occasionally, and that generally sustains me through most of the day. I mean, I don't suffer as much, even though my doctor's always worried about it. I don't suffer many hypos, again hypoglycemia, which is a low blood sugar. I don't suffer that as much anymore, right? Because my blood sugars don't really fluctuate as much anymore, and that to me is the biggest win out of all of this. Is I've taken back a bit more control, and that also leads to less anxiety, which is another win. So they kind of complements each other, and it all works as a system for me now. And occasionally I still, get hungry at night time, and if I do get hungry at night, I will just cook more bacon, eggs, and a beef patty before I go to bed because I'd rather have that and slowly push my blood sugar up than consume sugar because that's the worst thing for me is just to consume too much sugar. My blood sugars drop. Um, because they don't drop as fast anymore. That's one thing for sure. Um,
The fact that you're not experiencing as many hypo episodes would indicate I mean, you're doing the right thing, right?
Definitely. I mean, it's better for me, and I mean, I'm not having to react as much because nothing worse than having it plummet, and having to react with glucose because now it's slower, so I can still feel it, but I've got more time to do something about it, whether that's just consume, more meat, mostly meat. I mean, I still eat dairy, obviously eggs being dairy, but um, I might have a little bit of cream in drinks. I have cut down. I used to drink a bit too much soda. I've cut down the diet soda a lot and gone more to water in recent times, which is I think better for my stomach as well, my gut. Um, but I do have a little bit of cream and maybe a tiny little milk sometimes in a hot drink. And I don't drink coffee anymore either, which is when I started. I was drink Before I started this. I was drinking far too much excess coffee. Um, that was another thing I wanted to change, and I kind of changed that at the same time. I just cut coffee completely out of my diet, and I haven't had a coffee in over a year. Yeah,
And
that's
what changed after you gave up the coffee?
well, I think I, I don't feel. I mean, even if I am tired, I certainly don't feel it. It just changes the way you mentally are able to see things. I think there's not so many fluctuations. Um, you don't feel that really tiredness in the morning, and then the pickup from coffee. It's that doesn't really happen anymore. And even I mean, I attribute this probably more to the kind of the meat based diet, but I used to have real problems remembering what I'd taken with my insulin. I don't have those problems anymore, so I think there is a lot more mental clarity that's come out to it, and even my short-term memory is better than it used to be because notoriously it's been pretty bad. My long-term memory is good, but my short-term's never been that good. But I definitely have a lot more mental clarity now.
Oh, nice.
Mm.
So, do you think this is the pattern that would help most type 1 diabetics?
Oh, I think for sure. I mean, there's there's nothing that I can think of that's negative about it other than other people's perceptions, your doctor's perception. It's for anyone that, regardless of whether you're type 1 or type 2, I mean, even type 1, if it does help with your weight if you want it to. That's one thing it will. For me, that wasn't really a problem, and I've never been a big person. But even for myself, I still dropped. I mean, I was probably around 68. I've been in the 60s, mid 60s, or high 60s for the last 5, 10 years. It dropped down to 58 kilograms. So, and I was kind of worried at that point. It's like, is
How
it going
tall
to
are you?
stop? I'm about 5'5", 5'6". Yeah, so I'm not too tall, but I was worried. It's like, when is it going to stop reducing? But luckily it stopped around that level, which says to me my body realized, okay, that's where I need to be. Didn't keep going. So that was kind of a more of a, oh yeah, okay, my body knows what it's doing. It thinks I need to be around this weight for what I'm consuming, my height. Yeah, great. Um, sure, I'm a bit lighter than I thought I would be, but that doesn't bother me. I mean, I've, I'm as active as I need to be anyway. Now I can be even more active if I want to be. Um, yeah.
So, speaking of activity, I spoke to another gentleman who's type 1 diabetic and doing carnivore recently. And one of the ways that he was, he has been managing, especially prior to carnivore, was with a lot of exercise.
Mm, mm.
Um, do you do a lot of activity, and do you find that changes things up as far as your blood sugar goes?
I haven't been as much active of recent times. I used to be more active, but oddly enough, I found that the times I have exercised lately, my blood sugar doesn't go down as much as it used to. It kind of almost rises a little bit, which was kind of the opposite of what I was expecting. Because certainly in previous years, it's like the more you exercise, the more I have to worry about being low. But not recently. I find it almost has the opposite effect. Like when I'm out doing work in the yard, I come in, it's like, oh, why is my blood sugar a bit higher than I was expecting? I don't know what. what the cause of that is. But yeah, it hasn't impacted my activity at all. And if anything, I can be probably more active and have less effect in terms of my glucose levels from it.
That's really interesting.
Mm.
I wonder if that's something to do with increased protein consumption or something in your body
It could,
just going, oh, well,
yeah.
I can create the glucose I need, or
Yeah, I haven't quite I haven't quite figured that one out yet, but that's something I'm still working on because that's kind of an interesting side effect. And if I mean, it doesn't bother me so much, um, because if I used to go to the gym, go to the pool, and things like that, and that's always the one thing that kind of troubles you. Is it's like, okay, oh, do I go and do these activities and like, well, okay, I can't test myself. It's like, how do I feel? And that's something I've had most of my life that's caused me anxiety, being active and not being able to react to it. It's like, how do I feel? Do my blood sugars feel low? It's like, oh, now I'm nowhere near any glucose. What do I do? Kind of panic, panic, panic. So it's again taking back that control and knowing that, okay, well, even if I do feel a little bit low, it's not the end of the world. I've got time to deal with it. um, but yeah, if it goes up, that's even better, or if it stays relatively stable. I mean, even today, for example, I I don't always eat um, 3 meals a day. Sometimes I only eat 2 meals a day. Like maybe I'll skip breakfast and go and wait till I eat something at lunchtime if my blood sugar is a little bit higher in the morning. Or even this morning when it was relatively pretty much bang on normal, I just had some bacon eggs, and I was busy throughout the most of the day into the afternoon, and my blood sugar levels barely changed at all. So it's yeah, it's working out really well in that regard.
nice. Outside of your doctor, has anyone around you kind of noticed the way you're eating and commented on it?
Oh, at work they did, because I hadn't been in the office much. So, but next time they saw me, it's like, oh my God, you look a lot thinner. Um, Even though that was 10 kilograms, but still, it still has an impact. But people definitely noticed. And then I got the obvious questions around one or two of the people at work. I could tell they weren't opposed to the idea because one said, "Oh," I said, "I was like, eating just mostly meat," and he goes, "Oh, you're doing the carnivore diet." And I thought, "Oh yeah, I most basically am doing the carnivore diet." So I could tell there's at least a couple people there that aren't opposed to the concept, but I, most people don't comment on it in terms of what they think of it. I tell everyone I talk to basically I just basically eat meat and very little else if I can help it. Um, and they're not critical of it, at least. They still go on holding morning teas and eating all their pastries and their pies and having their lunches and their dinners. And yeah, I mean, I just have to cope around that. But if we've had work barbecues, and yeah, people. There's always someone that brings a lot of steak, a lot of meat. So I don't generally don't generally have problems dealing with that because there's always something there for me. So, but yeah, I've found people have been generally accepted of it.
So, how do you go with when there are those kind of sugary snacks around? Like, are you over the cravings now?
Oh, I'm someone who's never really been um, hooked in by things. Um, I mean, there are probably times I think to myself, I remember those days. But what I'm doing now is, it's a reassurance. What I'm doing now is a lot better than having to worry about that. And it's the same with a lot of addictions. I kind of attribute the same kind of concept with alcohol, with smoking. So I've never smoked, I've never drank, even as a teenager. I never latched onto either of those. It just, you know, and I think being diagnosed when I was 15 was kind of a good thing in that regard because those things were really, you don't do these things if you're diabetic. It can lead to complications, and I'd seen that in my dad's father because he got diagnosed diabetic when he was like in his 70s, and he was heavy smoker, heavy drinker, and eventually it led him to having one leg amputated at the knee, and then he wouldn't stop and having another one amputated at the knee. and eventually it just, yeah, eventually he passed through that. But it's the case of some people know it's wrong for them, but they just can't stop. And knowing those kind of stories really cemented the fact that, well, why would I want to put my whole life at risk by doing these things if it can lead to health complications? Because there's enough scaremongering, fear mongering out there from the medical community about, you've got to eat this way or you'll get diabetic complications. And what I'm proving is that no, you can live a normal life and not have complications. I have no complications whatsoever. And if anything, I'm eating a lot healthier now, um, despite what a doctor might think.
Yeah. Well, it's great to hear how well you're doing, Darren.
Mm.
How can people reach out to you? Do you have any social media or any way of getting in
Uh,
contact?
I do have Facebook and Instagram. I don't use them a lot. I've got my email, but yeah, I do have them.
So I'll link to those below.
Mm.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks very much for all you do for the community as well. Because without your videos, no one would, and other people's videos like this, you wouldn't reach that community. You wouldn't get the message out there. Like I say, it's really helpful what you do as well. So thanks, Dave.